Ali Diriöz, and I'm an associate professor of international relations at the International Entrepreneurship Department at TOBB University in Ankara, Turkey. And I've done my PhD actually on energy security, but in the phase of doing my PhD, I also worked as a consultant for the World Bank, and I've done a few consultancy projects, and I was very much interested into more, not just the energy itself, but water, energy, food nexus, and overall development as part of international political economy and globalization. Well, for many years, as it was in my case, usually there was the hydropolitics studies or energy security studies or climate change and environmental studies, and these disciplines or these areas of studies were quite focused, and there was relatively little interdisciplinary collaboration. But there were, of course, aware of some of the interconnectedness amongst these fields. And one of the areas which was studying this was was economics and development economics, especially people who studied environmental economics and neo-Malthusianism, the Malthusian theorem, which foresees a population crisis because it sees that the population is rising faster than the ability of the resources to renew themselves. So a problem with the global commons. If those global common goods are extracted without their ability to replenish, so not in a non-sustainable way, then they will be depleted, and that will cause a tragedy, and that will cause a tragedy for everyone, and it will affect many sectors. So overall, as the population of the world increased, as in Michael Clare, who had a very interesting book with the name Rising Power, Shrinking Planets. So as India, China, and the developing world's population as well as economy grew, and not just the population, but we had emerging new technologies such as cryptocurrencies, which are very electricity and energy intensive. So as the demand for energy increased geometrically or significantly, our ability to replenish those sources did not increase as much. Having said that, we also noticed that there is more and more pressure on to develop alternative energies, renewables. But renewables, they rely on an existing ecosystem, whether it's the water and rain circle or the wind or the sun. But with the exception of solar energy, especially for the wind and the hydroelectricity, atmospheric events are very related. And the water, in that case, is not only used for agriculture, but also for energy and also for household and industrial consumption. So the same resource, and typically when we give the examples of the tragedy of the commons, we take lakes as examples, such as Lake Arad. We have noticed that that same resource needs to be used efficiently, not just and sustainably, not just for energy generation, as in hydroelectrical dams, but also for agriculture. And here the choice of crops becomes important as well, not just the importance of drawing certain amounts of water, but also which crops you decide to use. And also, so it's for food, and also as the cities grow near those lakes or near those water resources, the industrial usage, the household usage, even basic things which at that time weren't considered much, but car wash, and people were using clean water almost, or utility waters for car wash, which is not very sustainable in that sense. And so these are interrelated, and hence when we talk about water, energy, and food nexus, we take an approach, a more comprehensive and interconnected approach, where the same water resources are affected by climate change, but they're also affected by climate change, by agriculture, and in consequence, they also affect energy output agricultural output, water available, but not just that. As a later consequence, they have consequences for how much food is available, for drought, climate events, too much, as there is a climate crisis, and we are now what is called no more in global warming, but global boiling age. We see that water actually boiling in those reservoirs. So it becomes a challenge not to have big reservoir hydroelectrical dams, but also to maintain because those waters can evaporate. And as a fourth or a third consequence, we see migration, drought, famine, food crisis also happening. So these are all interconnected. And because they're all interconnected, they require coordinated, efficient management at the political level, at the transport cross-border level, and also at the international level. For example, tomorrow I'm going to one of the regions in Turkey which is called Konya. Konya is actually, in terms of surface, it's the biggest province in Turkey, but in terms of population, it's probably in the top 10 or top 15. Still has around more than 3 million people, so it's not a small place. It's a big metropolitan area. And Konya is adjacent to the Salt Lake of Turkey in central Anatolia. And throughout history, the plain of Konya, because Turkey is quite mountainous and Konya area is quite plain, was known as a breadbasket. So lots of agriculture for Turkey. And there, one of the biggest challenges now is they have now sinkholes all the time because of water drainage for households, for utilities, also for agriculture, as well as even if they don't do anything, we have entered this age of global boiling nowadays. So water resources are becoming more and more scarce. Now, there are good universities, and I have some very esteemed colleagues at Konya who are studying these phenomena, but they also need to have more international collaboration, especially on development. They need to have developmental projects, and this is a need we feel. We want international institutions such as the World Food Program or the EU, in addition to the Turkish government and Turkish universities, to have collaborative projects to establish, let's say, um, green industrial zones where there could be more urban agriculture as well, rooftop, not just rooftop solar panels, but rooftop rainwater collection and agriculture. There are projects in place in many parts of the world. One example is Gotham Greens. It's a company which produces its own greens, simple greens like lettuce and tomatoes, but it's rooftop available, which not only makes more agricultural land available for other things, but also it saves transportation costs and fuel. Therefore, it's also low emissions. It's always easier to produce on the same campus or on the same industrial zone, and therefore urban agriculture becomes important. Now, these are relatively new technologies, and they require quite efficient planning. And the policy should be in place, both coordinated both at the local level and also through international institutions who need to share the know-how. So for me, for an international relations scholar, urban agriculture is not my field of expertise. However, I know, as someone who is very much interested in the water, energy, and food nexus, that this policy of green industrial zones, this urban rooftop, both rainwater collection and agriculture, in addition to the rooftop solar panels, needs to develop even more. So we need to collaborate efficient policies. So what we need to do, perhaps an example I would like to do in the future, maybe with institutions from the EU or from Romania, to organize some first roundtable meetings or workshops as to develop how the policies could be addressed jointly. And of course, it has to be able to attract investments, not just within Turkey, but foreign investments. So those are the type of policies, developmental policies that need to be developed. And as IR scholars or scholars of international relations, we need to focus more and more on these types of developmental issues. Well, for the web nexus, we just talked about the Konya example, but we have a bigger challenge though. Konya is only 3 or 4 million people. There's just a challenge of Istanbul. Now, Istanbul is a cross-continental city. It's a strategic passageway, transit corridor of energy as well as food. Especially, it's critical for Romania and Bulgaria and other littoral states of the Black Sea. And we saw during the Russia-Ukraine war that the food chain corridor, the grain corridor passing through the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, the Turkish Straits, was essential for global food security. Now we see today that both the water, energy, and food are interconnected. Let's take the case of Istanbul. For the food grain corridor, it's a very strategic passageway. For the petroleum or tanker or energy transportation of the countries of the Black Sea to and from the Black Sea, it's a strategic passageway. The tanker every day. There are dozens of tankers passing from the Bosphorus across Istanbul, which is also causing a security hazard, which is why LNG tankers are not allowed because they were not part of the Montreux Convention. And so it's also an energy passageway. It's also a food passageway, but now here comes the water part. Istanbul is a 16 million people city. It's a megapolis. Around 10 million people living on the European continent and about 6 million on the Asian continent. And especially for the people on both sides, there are actually two big peninsulas which are joining to form the strait, the Bosphorus Strait across Istanbul. And those peninsulas are heavily draining water. So they rely on the water sources of the region, but not so much is available. And that's a challenge, and that's an area of cooperation that the city of Istanbul really needs to make with Greece and Bulgaria, because they have a Maritsa and Tunja and Ergene river basin, a joint river basin, where Turkey is actually lower riparian state, and there are floods coming in. On one hand, we have in Edirne, which is not too far from Istanbul, floods coming, flooding Istanbul. But on the other hand, we see water crisis constantly, especially in summer. Year after year, the reservoirs around Istanbul are in crisis level. And that is an issue that Istanbul needs to address. So if you next time you're in Istanbul, think of the water, energy, and food nexus, because it is an example of how a megapolis needs to address all these challenges in an interconnected manner. So they need to also address rainwater harvesting. They need to address these urban agriculture, and they also need to address how to make sure they still have enough sustainable and clean energy on those same rooftops, because land is very scarcely available. They need to coordinate which of the rooftops they need to dedicate for urban agriculture and which ones for solar panel, or now new technologies are emerging on rooftop wind. So we'll see. So that's an example I would like to discuss. Well, again, there are plans, especially for the case of Istanbul and in Konya, to have better, first of all, water and rainwater harvesting. There are also efforts by private companies, dishwasher companies, that are trying to promote water efficiency. So on one hand, we have to harvest water, and the other hand, we have to uh, promote more efficiency. Clean water from these reservoirs should not be used for example, car wash. Gray water can be used, or treated water can be used for car wash. And on the other hand, there are considerations to make desalination as an option, but desalination is first environmentally not very promising option, and secondly is very energy intensive. So it's only it's a palliative solution. It's a temporary solution. It's not addressing the core of the problem. So I think from my observations, there are efforts, especially in the water management part, but there should be more as the technology is progressing. So there are rainwater harvesting and water efficiency efforts. But as the technology is harvesting, I think we should, and there are, very significant efforts for more rooftop panels and more electric vehicles, and they're expanding very fast in Turkey, hybrid and electric vehicles. But on the other hand, there should be more integrated, comprehensive efforts. The efforts right now are just water, or just solar rooftop, or just electric vehicles. They should address in a more comprehensive way a complete project which will address both the urban agriculture, water consumption, water efficiency, or rainwater harvesting, as well as the solar panel electric production. So we still have not seen a comprehensive project which addresses all three at the urban level. And both Konya and Istanbul need to do that, because these are the big cities which are causing pressure on these resources. So as those pressures will be relieved, they will not go away immediately, but as there will be less pressure, then the good agricultural practices will become perhaps more efficient in the countryside. One of the key challenges is, in general, with any nexus, is to have these separate policies coordinated. Let's take the environment, for example. The environment in Turkey is divided amongst several ministries. On one hand, there is the first ministry that comes to mind is the Ministry of Environment and Urban Development. Then there's also the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and then third, there's a Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. So already the environmental portfolio, or the WEF Nexus portfolio, is clearly divided into three ministries. But there's more. When it comes to the EU Green Deal, automatically the Foreign Ministry and the EU presidency under the Foreign Ministry of Turkey come into play, because they are concerned with compliance with the EU Green Deal. Turkey, as a candidate country, has pledged to the EU Green Deal and to the border carbon adjustment scheme. So Turkey will comply with these green industrial zones and these green productions at the EU standards, not only because there's a customs union, but also for the benefit of the Turkish people and Turkish population as well. So the foreign ministry also comes into play. That's already foreign ministries. And then there's a Ministry of Trade, because of the carbon border adjustment mechanisms. So we're already talking about 5 separate government entities, and with their sub-branches, many of them. So it's not an easy coordination. One of the first big challenges is to establish an efficient coordination for all these separate portfolio. One of the problems that I can see, if, for example, the Minister of Environment and Urban Affairs, their priority are not always the WEF nexus. They have other portfolios on their agendas, such as urban building, such as agriculture, but less about what forestry is also becoming important. Now here, with the forestry, I would like to continue with the opportunity. As we see, unfortunately, from natural disasters, those disasters that we are experiencing across borders, whether it's an earthquake or with a forest fire or a flood, we see more and more international collaboration. Countries selflessly are sending aid for the search and rescue and rebuilding operations of people affected by disasters. And we see Turkey helping Greece, Greece helping Turkey, or Romania helping Turkey, and not only during earthquakes, but also for forest fires. And that's actually, in the long term, an opportunity, because it will, if efficient, it will promote cross-border cooperation and for addressing the same global challenge of environmental crisis, and to address the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, because these are global challenges faced not only by the countries but every single citizen on the planet. So they should be addressed globally in harmony. So on one hand, we see this disconnection. That's a big challenge amongst the different ministries, not only in Turkey. This is the case actually in many countries. But on the other hand, we have opportunities. We see that a lot of the countries are becoming more rational, and there are instances they can set aside their differences to collaborate on emergencies and to help each other. So that's actually quite promising for to establish maybe certain understandings for future common operations in events of similar crises. Well, I think it's very important to on one hand, achieve the European Green Deal. But on the other hand, it's very important to understand that the concept of wealth nexus or energy security or climate security or food security is not a two-dimensional approach. It's actually multi-dimensional. And there could be some setbacks or some apparent slow progress and certain what seems like a compromise. But sometimes those apparent compromises might be necessary. And here I'm specifically talking about the case of nuclear energy, because nuclear energy, okay, has no emissions, but it has the problem of the nuclear waste. And on one hand, if it's done in a proper way, it could be relatively providing baseload energy. But in the long term, we all know that those nuclear wastes are challenges in themselves. So it's very important to properly calculate how much of them are necessary. Turkey is developing nuclear energy because it needs, with a population of 85 million plus over 8 million refugees, the country with the most refugees in the world. So there is obviously a need to provide energy to the population. However, in the long term, I think that should not be a setback. That should encourage more cooperation between Turkey and the European Union countries to develop more circular economies, sustainable development projects, and joint investments or exchange of technology on those fields. They should not just simply say that renewables are not doing the trick. No, they should. The technology is advancing, and as we have more economies of scales and new technologies such as ammonia or hydrogen, many new technologies are evolving. Then that could lead to further